Relationship with our agreement with the Islamic Chamber of Commerce, one of the key organs of the OIC, we have a mandate, express mandate from the OIC to lead in terms of developing the global halal agenda. And we sit as a party to the COMSEC meeting on developing an OIC halal standard. Now, you may think that this is two things going on in parallel. That is correct. The COMSEC meeting, if you like, is a gathering of the national standards bodies of the OIC countries. They perform an exercise in trying to come up with a single standard for the whole OIC. In our approach to developing the standard, what we've done is to break down the problem into 10 modules. It can be more, but for the time being, we're starting off with 10. And the idea is that each module addresses a specific part of the supply chain. We all talk about halal from farm to fork. Well, we break down that distance into 10 parts. This enables quite a number of things. One is that we can actually achieve the completion of the standards progressively, module by module, but also in the process of developing the standards, we're able to gather the relevant expertise in that particular sector so that we have a very focused and fruitful discussion. And the design of these modules is certainly with full intent. I mean, I can safely say when Director Mustafa Ismail, 3 years ago, was asking the question about animal feed. Should animal feed be halal, and what are the standards for halal animal feed? So we thought this must be important enough to address. And I'm glad to say that last month we held a technical meeting here in Manila to discuss the halal animal feed module. The timeline roughly is that we've released 4 drafts already during this year's World Halal Forum. We've extended the public review period till the end of the year because we have a lot of requests for people to make comments. And we hope, inshallah, that we complete the remaining 6 in time for next year's World Halal Forum. I think this needs to be made very clear that where existing standards exist, we will not replace them. There's certainly no need for that. I mean, it's very encouraging to hear that the PNS 2067, I think, is almost ready to be released. So what we would do is, as long as the PNS conforms to the IHI benchmark, there would be no need to revise it. It will just be a matter of IHI recognizing PNS as another accepted halal standard. If we look at the international benchmark for parallel or other standards, I mean, it's sad to say that halal is actually a laggard, so we can actually look across at other standards and how it's framed in order to see ahead and how we want to move forward. We have this structure here, and it's important to distinguish between accreditation and certification. Again, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of times the two terms get interchanged. At the bottom level, you have the supplier, the industry, the manufacturers like Barossa or whoever. They seek certification, whether it's for HACCP or management systems, from the certification body. The certification body in turn is accredited by an accreditation body. So the accreditation body certifies the certifier, if you like. And right at the very top, the accreditation bodies do a peer review through a mechanism like the International Accreditation Forum, or IAF. And on the side, you'll see that the standards and schemes are set independently, whether it be the ISO or private schemes like British Retail Consortium. They stay independent of the whole process. So this is what I would say is a typical international standard structure. In the case of halal, it is a big mystery what goes above certification. And you get this scenario at the very bottom where suppliers are getting multiple certification, all for halal. I was in Europe just 3 days ago, and in France, a lot of manufacturers have to get 3 halal certifications in order to satisfy the Moroccan, Tunisian, and the Algerian market. Because the Algerians will only trust the Paris Mosque, for example, which is Algerian run. And if a Tunisian organization certifies the product as halal, then the Moroccans and the Algerians won't consume it. And this is the reality of what happens particularly in Europe, where you have multi-ethnic Muslim society. So So our intention is to kind of restore order and mimic the international benchmark structure, where you have got these various layers, certification, the standard setting is independent, and there's also this level of accreditation. And perhaps we need to create a new kind of international halal accreditation forum. And the role of IHI here, again, is to remain independent and be the standard setting body. So in order to achieve what we want to do, really it's all about collaboration, and hence the key word in our organization name, which is alliance. And the idea is that we must be fully inclusive. Whilst we are working under the auspices of the OIC, we look beyond the OIC. We're not just confined to the 57 member states, it's beyond that. Especially engaging with the non-OIC producing countries. My last point about the final point on this slide about there's only so much the industry can do, and that's why I'm very encouraged to hear the previous speaker to talk about halal legislation. So the question is, what type of legal framework can work, say for the Philippines? There's no one-size-fits-all solution. What works, for example, here you have a pure public regulatory framework which works fine in Brunei and Malaysia and Indonesia, being Muslim majority countries. But how does it work for a Muslim minority country? The actual fact is that within the OIC, only one country, that is Brunei, has a Halal Act. Most OIC countries don't have any regulation or legislation at all to do with halal. And this is the ironic situation. You could also have a public-private regulatory framework where the government just deals with non-religious requirements, and you have a private regulatory setup to deal with the religious requirements. This works perfectly fine with a secular government, and this is the model that we see a lot in, say, the US and Australia, and I believe Singapore. Or you have a pure private regulatory framework where the private sector is left to run itself. This could again work in perhaps more mature markets where the private regulatory framework is very strong. Here, when you get a copy of the slides, you can see just a quick snapshot comparison of the various types of legislation operating in the other countries. If we look across at other types of standards like food safety standards, what we found is that the industry-driven initiative, being the Global Food Safety Initiative, has been one of the most effective in terms of trying to harmonize the industry. I attended their conference in Barcelona in February this year, and it was interesting to see the parallel. To me, a lot of the issues that were brought up were so similar to what's happening in the halal industry. You had this lack of mutual recognition, fragmentation. For example, if I'm a producer from Italy and I want to sell, and I've got certification for food safety based on IFS. If I want to export my product to Sainsbury's in UK, I'm not allowed to. Sainsbury's will say, sorry, you have to get BRC certification, and I have to be certified again for food safety based on the BRC standard. And if you take the BRC and IFS together, there's hardly any difference. And this is a very familiar story. This is the same thing that happens with halal, that if a producer wants to export to Saudi, Egypt, and Indonesia, they have to be audited 3 times, all for halal. What we're trying to achieve at the end of the day is common acceptance. The GFSI has a very good slogan which I like to copy, which is once certified, accepted